The penthouse door opened, and the first thing Ethan Cole heard was glass shattering. He froze in the doorway. Across the marble floor, his fiancée Vanessa Steele stood with her chest heaving, another vase already lifted in her hand. "You are replaceable," Vanessa hissed. "Do you understand me? People like you are replaceable." At her feet knelt an older woman in a gray housekeeping uniform, broken porcelain scattered around her knees. She did not cry. She did not flinch. She simply lifted her eyes, calm, unshaken, almost amused, and said 4 words that would echo through everything that followed. "You'll regret this someday." Ethan's stomach turned. Something about that voice, something about the way she held her chin, the way her shoulders squared, even while kneeling on broken glass. "Vanessa, what is going on?" he demanded. Vanessa turned, instantly soft, instantly smiling. "Nothing, baby. Just a clumsy new maid." Ethan looked at the old woman one more time. For half a second, their eyes met. Then she lowered her gaze, gathered the broken pieces, and walked away. He didn't know it yet. He wouldn't know for months. That clumsy new maid was his mother. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to Amazing Folktale, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Hype up the video. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what your local time is in the comments below. I love seeing how these stories connect people from all around the world. Let's get started. 3 months earlier, on a rain-soaked Tuesday night, Ethan Cole sat alone in his office on the 52nd floor, long after his employees had gone home. He was 34 years old, and by every external measure, he had already won at life. Cole Dynamics, the tech and real estate empire he built from a single rented office and a maxed-out credit card, was now worth billions. His name appeared on magazine covers. Strangers recognized him in airports, and yet, most nights, he sat in this office long after the lights of the city had gone gold and then dark, because home had never quite felt like home since his father died. His assistant, Priya Nandan, was the only person who still worked later than he did. She poked her head into his office that night, holding a manila folder. "You're doing it again," she said. "Doing what?" "Staying past midnight to avoid an empty penthouse." She wasn't asking. She'd worked for him for 6 years. She'd stopped pretending not to notice things a long time ago. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he opened his laptop and pulled up a name. Rosa Delgado, former employee, Cole Dynamics Warehouse Division. "Everything okay with the Delgado file?" Priya asked, stepping closer. "She was in a car accident, 6 years with the company, laid off during the restructuring last year. Hospital's about to send her to collections." Priya's brow lifted. "That's not your department anymore." "I know," Ethan typed quietly. Transferring funds anonymously through a private foundation with no company branding, no thank you card, no press release. Just a wire that would quietly erase a stranger's debt before she ever knew who sent it. "You could put your name on things like this," Priya said gently. "It would soften how people see you. The press paints you as ice." "I don't do it to be seen," Ethan said. "I do it because somebody has to remember what it felt like before all this." He gestured vaguely at the glass walls, the city lights, the empire around him. "My father used to say wealth doesn't change who you are, it just removes the excuses for hiding who you really are." It was a rare glimpse, the real Ethan Cole, buried under boardrooms and headlines. A man who paid strangers' hospital bills in the dark and told no one. A man who worked 18-hour days not out of greed, but because stillness reminded him too much of the father he'd lost and the mother he'd quietly drifted from in the years since. Weeks later, at the annual Cole Dynamics Gala, under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, Ethan dropped to one knee in front of 300 guests and lifted a ring toward Vanessa Steele. She was radiant that night, auburn hair swept back, a smile that seemed to light the entire room. Every camera in the building turned toward them. "Vanessa Steele," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Vanessa breathed, hands pressed to her mouth. "Yes, of course, yes." The room erupted in applause. Champagne, flashing lights, a perfect cinematic moment, but in the half-second between her answer and her embrace, something crossed Ethan's face, a flicker, so brief that even he couldn't name it, a hesitation, not in his love, but in something quieter, an instinct whispering that the yes had come a beat too fast, too polished, too rehearsed for a moment that should have felt spontaneous. He buried the feeling before it could form into a thought. He told himself it was nerves. Every groom got nerves. Later that night, driving home, Ethan called his mother, Margaret, from the car. "Mom, I did it. I proposed. There was a pause on the line. Not cold, but careful. "And how do you feel?" "Happy," Ethan said. "A little too quickly." "That's good, sweetheart." Another pause. "Have I met her yet?" Ethan winced. "You will, soon, I promise." After he hung up, Walter, the family's longtime driver, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Your mother still hasn't approved of anyone since your father passed," Walter said carefully. "Not one girlfriend in 9 years. She'll like Vanessa," Ethan said. Walter said nothing. He'd known Margaret Cole for 22 years. He knew that when she went quiet like that, it wasn't disapproval, it was observation. And Margaret Cole had never once been wrong. 2 hours outside the city, past the last cell tower and the last billboard, sat a small stone farmhouse with a garden gone slightly wild, and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. This was where Margaret Cole had lived alone for the past 9 years. Not because she couldn't afford better, but because she had chosen to. Her son was a billionaire. She drove a 12-year-old sedan and grew her own tomatoes. "You could live in any house in this country," her neighbor Fran said one afternoon over the fence. "Why do you still hang your own laundry, Margaret?" Margaret smiled, pinning a shirt to the line. "Because my hands still work, Fran. And because the day I stop doing things for myself is the day I start forgetting who I am." It would have been easy to assume Margaret Cole was simply a humble old woman, content with a small life. But there was a story beneath the quiet, one almost nobody knew. 26 years earlier, when Ethan was a boy and his father's construction business was still finding its feet, Margaret had built something of her own from a card table in her kitchen. A small mail-order textile company, sewing curtains and tablecloths by hand and selling them out of a rented storage unit. Within 8 years, that little hobby had grown into a regional supplier with 11 employees. She sold it quietly, right before her husband's business took off, folding the money into their family's foundation without ever asking for credit. Nobody at Cole Dynamics knew that the sweet old woman who occasionally visited the office was once a shrewd, self-made businesswoman who had negotiated contracts that made grown men sweat. Margaret Cole did not miss things. She noticed people's hands when they shook hers. She noticed the half-second delay before someone smiled. She had spent a lifetime reading rooms, and grief had not dulled that gift. If anything, since her husband's death, it had sharpened. So when the wedding invitation arrived in her mailbox, thick cardstock, gold foil, "Ethan Cole and Vanessa Steele request the honor of your presence," Margaret did not immediately reply. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time, turning the invitation over in her hands. Then she picked up her phone and called Walter. "Walter, it's Margaret. Mrs. Cole. Everything all right? I need a favor," she said, "and I need you to keep it between us." "Of course. I need a housekeeping uniform, and I need you to get me hired at the estate. Through an agency, not through Ethan. Nobody can know who I am." There was a long silence on the line. "Mrs. Cole, are you sure about this?" Margaret looked out her kitchen window at the gray autumn sky. "My son has never once brought this woman to meet me in person," she said quietly. "Not once, Walter, in 8 months of engagement. A man doesn't hide the woman he loves from his mother, unless somewhere, deep down, he already senses something isn't right." She paused. "I'm not doing this because I don't trust my son. I'm doing this because I trust his instincts more than his words. And right now, his instincts are screaming, even if his heart won't listen." This wasn't jealousy. It wasn't control. It was something far more dangerous to a con artist than any of those things. It was a mother who refused to look away. To the world, Vanessa Steele was flawless. She arrived at Cole Dynamics events in tailored couture, greeted the janitorial staff by name, remembered the birthdays of executive assistants, and once made headlines for personally funding a scholarship for an employee's daughter. Reporters called her the people's fiancée. Employees adored her, at least the ones who only saw her in front of a camera. But there was another Vanessa, one who existed only behind closed doors. "Cut 2 names from the wedding guest list," she told her personal assistant one afternoon, voice flat and businesslike the instant her office door clicked shut. "Quietly, don't make it obvious." "Which 2?" the assistant asked. "You know which 2, Vanessa said, not looking up from her phone. Later that same week, her phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. "Don't forget what we agreed." Vanessa's jaw tightened. She read it twice, her thumb hovering. Then she deleted it, wiped her expression clean, and walked back into a room full of wedding planners with a bright, easy smile already back in place. "I have a small request," she told Ethan one evening. curling into his side on the couch, her voice soft and syrupy. "About your mother, for the wedding prep. I just think, with everything going on, the noise, the vendors, the chaos, it might be kinder to put her up somewhere more comfortable, a boutique hotel nearby maybe, rather than the main estate." "You think she'd rather be at a hotel than with family?" Ethan asked, surprised. "I think she deserves peace and quiet," Vanessa said, tracing a finger along his jaw. "I just want everything to be perfect for her, for us." It sounded on its surface like thoughtfulness, like a woman eager to please her future mother-in-law. It was, in truth, a wall, a way to keep Margaret at a careful, controllable distance, far from the one place Vanessa couldn't fully script, her own daily behavior, under a roof, under real scrutiny. Ethan, exhausted from a week of closing a 9-figure acquisition, nodded without a second thought. "Whatever you think is best," he said. He had no idea he'd just agreed to the very thing that would nearly cost him everything, a wall between his mother and the truth. But Margaret Cole did not need an invitation to see clearly. She simply needed a uniform. The agency van dropped Margaret off at the service entrance of the Cole estate on a cold Thursday morning. She wore a plain gray uniform, sensible shoes, and a name tag that read Doyle. Walter had arranged everything through a legitimate cleaning agency 2 counties over. No connection to the family, no paper trail leading back to the Cole name, to the household staff, to the wedding planners, and most importantly to Vanessa. Mrs. Doyle was simply the new part-time housekeeper, brought in for the wedding rush. Margaret's heart pounded harder than she expected as she stepped through the servants' entrance for the first time. She had walked through the front door of that estate as a guest of honor before. Now she walked through the back as no one at all. "This is for Ethan," she reminded herself. "Whatever I find, or don't find, this is for him." Vanessa breezed through the kitchen an hour later, phone pressed to her ear, and stopped when she saw the new face scrubbing the counters. "Oh, you must be the new girl," Vanessa said, hanging up mid-sentence, flashing a bright smile. "Mrs. Doyle, is it? I'm so glad you're here. We are absolutely swamped." "Happy to help," Margaret said, keeping her voice lower and rougher than her natural tone, her eyes fixed politely on the counter. There was no flicker of recognition in Vanessa's face. Why would there be? She and Margaret had never once been in the same room. 8 months of engagement, and Ethan's own mother was a stranger to his bride-to-be. That alone tells me something, Margaret thought grimly, wiping down a counter that didn't need wiping. For the rest of that morning, Margaret watched. She watched Vanessa greet the wedding florist with warm, easy charm. She watched her pose for photos with the catering staff, laughing, touching arms, every gesture calibrated for a camera that wasn't even there. Then Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. The moment he stepped through the front door, Vanessa's whole posture changed. Softer, sweeter, eyes wide with adoration. "Baby, you're home early," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "Meeting ended early," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "How's everything going with the wedding stuff?" "Perfectly," Vanessa said. "Everyone's been an absolute dream to work with." She glanced toward the kitchen, and for one fraction of a second, so brief, Margaret nearly missed it. Her eyes went flat and cold as they passed over Mrs. Doyle. Then Ethan's attention shifted, and the warmth snapped instantly back into place. There it is, Margaret thought. The mask. That evening, Margaret was folding linens near the study when she overheard Vanessa's voice through a half-open door, low and clipped on a phone call. "No, it's fine. It's under control," Vanessa was saying. "The mother's not even coming to the estate. She's staying off-site the whole time. This'll be easy." Margaret's hands went still over the linens. "Easy?" she thought. What exactly is easy? She had come here expecting, at worst, to find a woman who was cold, ambitious, maybe a little calculating, the kind of personality that could survive in Ethan's business world but might not make the gentlest wife. She had not expected the word plan. She had not expected the tone of someone managing a problem rather than planning a wedding. For the first time since she'd put on the uniform, Margaret felt something colder than suspicion settle into her chest. She didn't yet know what Vanessa's plan was. But she now knew, with absolute certainty, that one existed, and that she, the invisible woman in gray, might be the only person positioned to uncover it before the wedding made it too late to matter. The pre-wedding garden gathering was meant to be small, close family friends, a few executives, soft lighting strung between the oak trees. Margaret, as Mrs. Doyle, was assigned to refill drinks and clear plates, moving quietly along the edges of the party the way invisible people are trained to move. She was refilling a wine glass near the dessert table when she fumbled, just slightly, and a few drops splashed onto the white tablecloth. Vanessa's laugh cut through the low hum of conversation like a blade. "Oh my God," she said loudly, drawing eyes from nearby guests. "Can you actually do anything right? This is a $2,000 tablecloth." She snatched a napkin and dabbed at it herself, shaking her head with theatrical exasperation. "I don't know where this agency finds people." A few guests chuckled awkwardly. Margaret lowered her eyes, murmured an apology, and stepped back, her pulse steady, her expression unreadable, though inside, something old and sharp twisted in her chest. She had built a company. She had negotiated with men twice her size across boardroom tables, and now she stood being mocked over a few drops of wine by a woman who had never worked an honest day in her life. Across the garden, Ethan stood with his phone pressed to his ear, deep in a call about a delayed shipment overseas, his back turned entirely to the moment. He never saw it. He never heard it. He was distracted by business, Margaret thought later, watching her own son from 10 feet away, invisible to him. He is always distracted by business. That is not new. What is new is what's happening right under his nose while he looks the other way. The injustice of it settled into her like a stone. 2 days later, while organizing invoices for the wedding planner, a task Vanessa had casually assigned to the new girl without a second thought, Margaret noticed something odd. Several vendor payments, ones that should have routed through the estate's standard household account, had instead been redirected to a private account under a name Margaret didn't recognize. V. Steel Holdings, LLC. For convenience, a note in Vanessa's handwriting read, "Clip to the invoice. Route through here from now on." Margaret copied the account details onto a scrap of paper, folded it small, and tucked it into her apron pocket. That night, back at the modest guest cottage on the property where the household staff stayed, Walter found her sitting at the small kitchen table, the scrap of paper spread in front of her. "Margaret," he said quietly, using her real name now that they were alone. "I think you've gone far enough. You've seen enough. She's unkind. She's controlling money she shouldn't be touching. Tell Ethan. Reveal yourself. Let him make his own decision." Margaret shook her head slowly. "Not yet." "Why not? What more do you need to see?" She looked up at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "Because a woman who redirects a few vendor payments for convenience, and a woman who humiliates a stranger in front of a crowd for sport, those are two very different kinds of dangerous, Walter. And when I see two different kinds of dangerous in the same person, in the same week, my instinct tells me I haven't found the real reason yet. I've only found the symptoms." Walter sat down heavily across from her. "And if you're wrong? If there is no bigger reason? If this is just who she is? Then I'll reveal myself. And I'll tell my son the truth as gently as I can," Margaret said. "But Walter, in 9 years since my husband died, I have not been wrong about a single person who walked into this family's life. Not once. I don't intend to start being wrong about the one person who matters most." Walter didn't argue further. He simply nodded, refilled her tea, and left her with her notes, and with the growing, uneasy certainty that whatever Vanessa Steele was hiding, it went far deeper than a redirected invoice. The opportunity came on a quiet Tuesday, when Vanessa left for a dress fitting 2 towns over and the house fell into an unusual hush. Margaret had been assigned to dust the home office, Vanessa's private space, technically off limits to most staff, but Mrs. Doyle had quietly made herself useful enough over the past weeks that no one questioned her presence anywhere in the house anymore. Invisibility, Margaret had learned, was its own kind of master key. She dusted the shelves, she straightened the desk, and then, tucked behind a stack of bridal magazines in the bottom drawer, her fingers brushed against a manila folder. She shouldn't have opened it. She knew that even as she did it. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, and a name scrawled across a sticky note in the corner. Dr. Numbers. Recurring numbers, modest amounts, nothing dramatic. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, spread out over months, all moving from an account with Vanessa's name on it toward an account she didn't recognize. Margaret's mind raced. A business partner? A family member? A debt? She heard the front door open downstairs, far earlier than expected, and her heart lurched. She shoved the folder back into the drawer, straightened the magazines on top, and was dusting a bookshelf across the room by the time footsteps reached the office door. It was only the gardener, checking about the outdoor lighting for the wedding, but Margaret's hands didn't stop trembling for several minutes after he left. Dr. she thought. Who are you? 3 days later, while helping the wedding planner review the final seating chart in the sunroom, Margaret overheard something that made the folder suddenly feel far more significant. It's so wonderful when a couple finds their perfect match the second time around, the wedding planner said cheerfully to a florist, flipping through a binder. Vanessa mentioned she was engaged once before, years ago. Didn't work out, obviously, but I always find it so touching when someone doesn't give up on love. The florist murmured something polite in return. Neither of them noticed Margaret go very still near the window, a stack of place cards frozen in her hands. Engaged before, Ethan had never once mentioned that. Did he know? Had Vanessa told him, or had she erased that chapter entirely, the way people erase things they don't want examined too closely? And then, just when Margaret was certain she understood the shape of the danger she was circling, something happened that unsettled her more than any folder or overheard phone call. Vanessa began to change. It started small. A genuine thank you instead of a dismissive wave. Vanessa bringing Mrs. Doyle a cup of tea unprompted one cold afternoon. A quiet apology, almost mumbled, for the garden party incident. I was stressed that day, I shouldn't have snapped at you like that. It didn't fit the pattern Margaret had spent weeks documenting. A woman capable of redirecting funds, hiding folders, and erasing a past engagement, did not simply become kind out of nowhere. Unless, Margaret thought, watching Vanessa's face carefully over the rim of her teacup one evening. She isn't performing kindness right now, unless something else is happening underneath all of this, something I haven't uncovered yet. For the first time since she'd put on the uniform, Margaret Cole genuinely didn't know which version of Vanessa Steele was real, and that uncertainty, more than any of the evidence she'd gathered so far, kept her from sleeping that night. It happened on a rainy evening, 3 weeks before the wedding. Margaret found Vanessa alone in the estate's small library, curled into a window seat, mascara streaked down her cheeks, a half-empty glass of wine forgotten on the sill beside her. For once, there was no audience, no fiancé to perform for, no staff watching, just Vanessa, and a woman she believed to be nothing more than Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, wiping her face quickly when she noticed Margaret in the doorway. "You don't need to see this. I'm fine." "You don't look fine," Margaret said gently, setting down her cleaning cart and stepping closer despite every instinct telling her to keep her distance. Vanessa let out a shaky laugh. "Do you know what it's like," she said quietly, "to grow up counting coins for the laundromat? To share one bedroom with 3 siblings? To watch your mother cry over a shut-off notice for the electricity?" She shook her head. "Nobody here knows that about me. They just see the girl in the couture dress and assume I was always this. I wasn't." Margaret sat down slowly across from her, saying nothing, letting the silence do its work. "I am so terrified," Vanessa whispered, "of losing all of this, of going back to nothing. You have no idea what it's like to claw your way into a life like this and know every single day that it could disappear." For the first time since arriving at the estate, Margaret felt something shift inside her chest. Not suspicion, but something far more complicated. Recognition. She too had once built something from nothing at a kitchen table. She too understood the particular terror of a woman who had tasted scarcity and would do almost anything not to taste it again. Maybe I've misjudged her, Margaret thought that night, lying awake in the small guest cottage. Maybe underneath the mask isn't a villain. Maybe it's just fear. The next morning, she told Walter as much. "I think I need to reconsider everything," Margaret admitted over coffee. "Perhaps she isn't hiding something sinister. Perhaps she's simply a frightened woman who has learned to survive by performing confidence she doesn't feel." "So what now?" Walter asked. "I think," Margaret said slowly, "it may be time to reveal myself. Bless the wedding. Move forward. Perhaps I came here looking for a villain and found instead a wounded girl trying to build a life." Over the following days, the story seemed to resolve itself with almost cinematic neatness. Vanessa apologized publicly to the household staff for her earlier coldness, admitting, through visible tears, that the wedding stress had brought out the worst in her. She requested Mrs. Doyle specifically to help plan a small family dinner, treating her with unmistakable warmth and respect. Ethan, sensing the shift, mentioned to Walter how much happier and more grounded Vanessa seemed lately. The wedding date, originally set for late spring, was moved up by 6 weeks. Vanessa's idea. "I don't want to wait anymore," she told Ethan, eyes shining. "I just want to start our life." Margaret watched all of it unfold and allowed herself, cautiously, to feel relief. The house felt lighter, The tension she'd carried in her shoulders for weeks began finally to ease. Everything, it seemed, had resolved itself. It was, of course, exactly what it looked like, for now. 6 days before the wedding, Margaret was gathering laundry from Vanessa's dressing room when a second phone slid out from beneath a folded sweater and clattered onto the hardwood floor. It wasn't Vanessa's usual phone, the sleek rose gold one she carried everywhere. This one was older, plain, cracked in one corner, clearly kept hidden, clearly kept separate for a reason. Margaret knew with absolute certainty that she shouldn't touch it. She picked it up anyway. It wasn't locked. The most recent messages loaded instantly. A thread with a contact simply saved as DRV. You said the wire would clear by Friday. It's clearing. Stop texting me at this number, someone could see. I don't care anymore, Vanessa. Pay what you owe or I go to Ethan Cole myself. I have copies of everything from our marriage. Every account, every signature. You think a fresh name erased any of it? Margaret's hand went cold around the phone. Dr. Daniel Reyes, and the word that stopped her heart entirely, marriage. She scrolled further, hands shaking now, piecing together fragments of a story that had clearly been unfolding for months, maybe years, in the shadows behind Vanessa's perfect public smile. A previous marriage, apparently undissolved on paper, or dissolved so quietly no one in Ethan's world had ever heard of it. A man named Daniel Reyes, who knew things about Vanessa's past, financial things, legal things, and was threatening to bring all of it directly to Ethan, unless he was paid. The poor upbringing confession in the library hadn't been entirely a lie, Margaret realized with a sick lurch in her stomach. It had simply been a carefully edited version of the truth, enough vulnerability to earn sympathy, none of the parts that would earn suspicion. The real fear wasn't losing love, it was losing a scheme, right before it paid off. Margaret barely had time to process what she was reading before the dressing room door swung open. Vanessa froze in the doorway, eyes locking instantly onto the phone in Margaret's hand. The transformation was immediate and total. The warmth of the past 2 weeks vanished in an instant, replaced by something cold, sharp, and dangerous. "Give me that," Vanessa said, voice low and shaking with fury as she crossed the room and snatched the phone away. "I'm sorry, I only picked it up because it fell," Margaret began. "You don't touch my things. Do you understand me?" Vanessa's eyes were wild now, calculating even in her panic. "If you say one word about this to anyone, one word, I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will call every agency, every household, every name you've ever put on an application, and I will end you. Do you understand?" Margaret said nothing. She simply looked back at Vanessa, steady and unafraid, the same way she had on the very first day kneeling among broken porcelain. Vanessa stormed out, phone clutched tight in her fist, leaving Margaret alone in the dressing room, with her heart pounding and a truth far darker than she'd imagined, settling over her like a shadow. The kindness had been real, in its way. But so was everything else. The hidden accounts, the erased marriage, the man-threatening exposure, the wedding racing toward a finish line built on a foundation of lies. Margaret sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, steadying her breathing. The wedding was 6 days away. And now, for the first time since she'd put on the gray uniform, Margaret understood exactly what she was fighting, and exactly how little time she had left to stop it. That night, Margaret didn't sleep. By morning, she had made a decision. "I need you to bring me to Priya Nandan," she told Walter, quietly, without Ethan knowing, today. They met in a small coffee shop 3 miles from the estate, far from any camera that might recognize either Margaret Cole or her son's sharp-eyed lawyer. Priya arrived skeptical, her arms crossed. Walter said this was urgent and confidential. "I have to be honest, I wasn't expecting Ethan's mother. I need your discretion before I need your help," Margaret said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. The account number she'd copied weeks earlier, along with a hurried handwritten summary of what she'd read on the hidden phone. "I believe Vanessa Steele has been diverting company-adjacent funds through a private account, and I believe she may still be legally entangled in a prior marriage to a man named Daniel Reyes, someone actively threatening to expose her unless he's paid." Priya's expression shifted from skepticism to sharp, focused attention with startling speed. She was, after all, exactly the kind of person who noticed things, which was precisely why Margaret had chosen her. "Give me 48 hours, Priya said finally. It took less than that. By the following evening, Priya returned with a folder of her own, considerably thicker than the one Margaret had found in Vanessa's office. "You were right about the funds," Priya said, spreading documents across Walter's kitchen table. "Small, incremental transfers, nothing large enough to trigger automatic flags, but consistent, over 8 months, moving from accounts connected to the wedding budget into an LLC registered under Vanessa's name. From there, further transfers moved into an account belonging to a Daniel Reyes. "And the marriage?" Margaret asked, bracing herself. Priya nodded grimly. Public records were harder to trace because Vanessa used a slightly different legal name at the time, a maiden name variation. But it's real. Daniel Reyes and Vanessa were legally married 6 years ago. There's no finalized divorce filing on record, which means, depending on state law and the specifics of her current engagement paperwork, her engagement to my son may not be entirely what it claims to be, Margaret finished quietly. The three of them sat in heavy silence for a long moment. "There's one more thing," Priya said. "I reached out to Daniel Reyes directly, carefully, through a private investigator contact, not myself. I didn't reveal who I was working for. He was surprisingly willing to talk. He claims Vanessa promised him a payout once the marriage to Ethan was finalized and the money became accessible. He says he's tired of waiting and tired of being threatened into silence himself. He may be willing to confirm everything in person if approached the right way." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. 6 days ago she had believed she'd misjudged a frightened young woman. Now she understood the far more painful truth. Vanessa's fear had been real, but not for the reasons she'd claimed. It was the fear of a scheme collapsing, not a heartbreaking. "The rehearsal dinner is in 4 days, Margaret said, opening her eyes. "That's where this ends, not the wedding day itself. I won't let it get that far. The rehearsal dinner." Walter reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Are you ready for what happens after, Margaret? Once Ethan knows everything, not just about Vanessa, but about you? About the uniform, the disguise, all of it?" Margaret managed a tired, resolute smile. "I have been ready to lose my son's approval since the day I put on that uniform, Walter. What I am not ready to do is let him lose himself to a lie." The rehearsal dinner was held in the estate's grand dining hall, string lights woven through the rafters, 40 of the family's closest friends and colleagues seated at a long table draped in white linen. Vanessa sat beside Ethan, glowing, radiant, playing her final role to perfection. Margaret stood near the kitchen doorway in her gray uniform, watching the toasts begin, watching her son laugh at something Vanessa whispered in his ear, watching the life he thought he was about to build. She waited until dessert was served, then she walked to the center of the room. "Excuse me," Margaret said, her voice steady and clear, cutting easily through the low hum of conversation. "Before this dinner goes any further, I have something to say." A few guests chuckled awkwardly, assuming the housekeeper had wandered in with some small, forgettable announcement about the catering. Then Margaret reached up and removed the gray headscarf she'd worn every day for 6 weeks, letting her silver hair fall loose. She straightened her shoulders, the posture of a woman who had once negotiated boardroom deals, not a woman who scrubbed counters for a living. "My name is not Mrs. Doyle," she said, her eyes finding Ethan's across the room. "My name is Margaret Cole. I am Ethan's mother." The room fell into stunned, absolute silence. Ethan rose halfway out of his chair, color draining from his face. "Mom, what are you?" "I have been working in this house for 6 weeks, disguised as a member of the household staff," Margaret continued, her voice unwavering despite the tremor she felt building in her chest. "Because you never brought Vanessa to meet me. And because my instincts told me something was wrong, long before I had any proof. I am sorry for the deception, Ethan. But I am not sorry for what it uncovered." Vanessa had gone pale, her hand gripping the edge of the table. "This is insane," she said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. "She's clearly unwell, Ethan. She's—" "Priya," Margaret said calmly, "if you would." Priya Nandan rose from her seat near the back of the room, a folder already in hand, and walked to the center of the floor. "I've spent the last 4 days verifying financial records tied to Vanessa Steele," Priya said, her voice crisp and professional despite the tension crackling through the room. "Approximately $82,000 has been diverted from wedding and household accounts over the past 8 months into a private LLC under Vanessa's name, and from there into an account belonging to a man named Daniel Reyes." Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on Vanessa, who had begun shaking her head rapidly. Those are business transactions. That's not what it looks like." The dining hall's side door opened. A man in his late 30s, uncomfortable in an ill-fitting jacket, stepped inside. Walter had contacted him quietly 2 days earlier, arranging for him to arrive at precisely this moment. "Daniel," Vanessa breathed, all color gone from her face now. "I'm sorry, Vanessa," Daniel Reyes said quietly, though his eyes were fixed on Ethan. I didn't come here to hurt you. I came here because I'm tired of carrying this alone. He turned to Ethan. Vanessa and I have been legally married for 6 years, Mr. Cole. As far as I know, that marriage was never dissolved. She's been paying me to stay quiet. The room seemed to hold its breath entirely. Ethan stood frozen at the head of the table, staring at the woman he had proposed to under crystal chandeliers, the woman he had planned to spend the rest of his life with, as the carefully constructed version of her he'd fallen in love with dissolved completely in front of 40 witnesses. Is this true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Say something, Ethan said louder now, the shock in his voice curdling into something harder. Vanessa, is any of this true? Ethan, I can explain, Vanessa said, rising from her chair, reaching for his hand. He stepped back before she could touch him. It's not what it looks like. Daniel and I, that was a mistake years ago. It doesn't mean anything. I was going to handle it before the wedding, I swear. Handle it? Ethan repeated flatly. You mean pay him off with money diverted from my accounts and marry me anyway without telling me any of it? Vanessa's composure cracked further. Cornered now, she turned, as Margaret had quietly predicted she might, toward the one person in the room she assumed would be easiest to discredit. This is a setup, Vanessa said suddenly, whirling toward Margaret, her voice rising with desperate energy. Your mother planted all of this. She's been in this house for weeks, going through my things. She probably forged half of these documents because she never wanted me marrying you in the first place. Jealous mothers do things like this, Ethan. You know that. For a moment, the accusation hung in the air, and Margaret saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her son's face, not because he believed it, but because grief and love and shock make even the strongest minds momentarily doubt what's standing directly in front of them. Margaret stepped forward, calm as still water. I anticipated you might say something like that, she said quietly. She reached into the pocket of her apron and withdrew a small caregiver monitoring watch, the kind designed for elderly patients worn discreetly on the wrist, equipped with a basic audio recorder for safety check-ins. I have worn this every day since my husband passed, in case of a fall, in case of an emergency, Margaret explained, holding it up for the room to see. I was wearing it 3 weeks ago in the library the evening you spoke to me about your childhood. I want to be clear. I did not intend to record you that night. I was not trying to entrap you. I believed in that moment that you were finally being honest with me. She pressed a small button on the side of the watch. A tinny but unmistakable recording of Vanessa's voice filled the silent dining hall. I promised Daniel he'd get his share once everything with Ethan's finalized. I just need the wedding to happen first. After that, it won't matter anymore. The room erupted into stunned murmurs. Vanessa's face went white, then red, her mouth opening and closing without sound. You can't use that. That's illegal. It's a personal safety device recorded on my own property in a conversation you initiated, Margaret said evenly. I am no lawyer, but I suspect Priya can speak to what it's admissible for. Ethan looked at Vanessa, really looked at her. For what felt like the first time in 8 months, the performed tears, the rehearsed vulnerability, the carefully timed warmth toward Mrs. Doyle once she'd realized she was being watched. All of it clicked into place at once, a puzzle revealing a picture he never wanted to see. Get out, he said quietly. Then louder, his voice breaking on the edge of fury and heartbreak. Get out of my house, Vanessa. Vanessa looked around the silent room, at the guests avoiding her eyes, at Daniel standing near the door, at Margaret standing steady and unmoved, and understood, finally, that there was no performance left that could save her. She left without another word. The wedding, of course, never happened. Within a week, the story had rippled through Ethan's professional circle, then further, the way scandal always does among people with enough money and enough enemies to make sure it spreads. Vanessa Steele's name, once printed in glowing profiles as the people's fiancée, now appeared in far less flattering headlines. Cole Dynamics' legal team, led quietly by Priya, filed a formal complaint regarding the diverted funds. Because the amounts, while significant, had been carefully structured to stay under certain reporting thresholds, the case moved through financial mediation rather than a dramatic criminal trial. But the outcome was, in its own way, its own kind of justice. Vanessa was ordered to repay every diverted dollar, along with damages, and any hope she'd had of quietly slipping into a life of inherited wealth evaporated along with her engagement. Daniel Reyes, having voluntarily cooperated with Priya's investigation and provided documentation proving Vanessa had orchestrated the fund diversions largely without his direct involvement, avoided prosecution himself. But he walked away from the entire situation with nothing. No payout, No marriage, no future tied to the Cole fortune he'd hoped to quietly siphon from. Vanessa lost far more than money. Her name became a cautionary tale whispered at the exact galas and dinners she'd once dominated. Wedding planners who had once fought for her business declined to return her calls. Friends who had toasted her engagement quietly distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. She had built an entire identity on being irreplaceable, magnetic, untouchable, and in a single evening she had become, in the eyes of everyone who mattered to her, exactly what she'd once cruelly called an old housekeeper kneeling in broken glass. Replaceable. There was no dramatic act of revenge required. No one pushed her out of a door or humiliated her the way she had humiliated others. Her downfall arrived the way most real consequences do. Quietly, thoroughly, through the simple, inevitable collapse of a scheme built on lies too large to hold their shape once the light finally reached them. Ethan, for his part, didn't spend his energy on anger toward Vanessa for long. Anger, he realized in the weeks that followed, was a poor investment compared to the one relationship the entire ordeal had unexpectedly, painfully, beautifully repaired. 3 weeks after the rehearsal dinner, Ethan drove out to the small stone farmhouse, 2 hours outside the city, the same drive he'd made maybe 4 times in the past 2 years. Always rushed, always distracted, always leaving sooner than his mother wanted. This time, he stayed. He found her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt in an old cardigan, nothing at all like the gray uniform that had fooled him for 6 weeks. "Mom," he said, standing at the edge of the garden path. Margaret looked up, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said finally, his voice rough, "not for the wedding, for everything before it. For not bringing Vanessa here. For letting Walter's warnings and your silence go right past me because I was too buried in work to actually listen. You tried to tell me something was wrong, in your own way, months ago, and I brushed it off because it was easier than slowing down." Margaret rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. "I didn't do this to prove I was right, Ethan. I did it because I have spent 9 years watching you build an empire and lose pieces of yourself in the process. And I wasn't willing to watch you lose the rest of it to someone who saw you as a fortune to be managed instead of a son to be loved." Ethan's eyes stung. "I kept away from you for so long. I told myself it was because I was busy. But really, I think it was easier to stay busy than to sit with how much I missed Dad. And somewhere in there, I think I stopped letting myself miss you too." Margaret stepped forward and pulled her son into her arms the way she hadn't in years. Not the careful brief embraces of holiday visits, but something full and unguarded. "You don't have to explain it to me," she said quietly. "I already understand. Grief makes people build walls, even against the people who love them most. I built a few of my own, out here, in this garden, further from you than I ever wanted to be." They stood like that for a long while, the autumn wind moving through the trees around them. "I want you to come back," Ethan said eventually, pulling back to look at her. "Not just for holidays. I want to actually know you again, Mom. The real you. The one who ran a company before I was even old enough to understand what that meant. The one who spent 6 weeks in a housekeeping uniform because she trusted her instincts more than my judgment, and turned out to be right." Margaret laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I'd like that too." In the months that followed, something quietly extraordinary happened. Ethan began driving out to the farmhouse most weekends, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. Margaret in turn began spending time at Cole Dynamics, not as a housekeeper this time, but as an advisor, her decades-old business instincts proving sharper than half the boardroom. Priya, who had become an unlikely but steadfast ally through the entire ordeal, often joked that Margaret Cole should have been running the company all along. The disguise that had once been born out of a mother's desperate fear became in time the very thing that rebuilt her son's trust in her judgment completely. Margaret never wore the gray uniform again after that night in the dining hall. She didn't need to. She had already proven, in the most difficult way imaginable, exactly what kind of mother she was. And Ethan, for the first time since his father's death, finally understood something his mother had been trying to teach him all along. That the people who truly love you are rarely the ones who dazzle you at a gala, hands raised in a perfect camera-ready yes. Sometimes, they are the ones kneeling quietly among broken glass, refusing to look away, waiting patiently for the day you finally see them clearly.
Moral of the story, that real character is shown by how people treat those who appear weak, not by the face they project to the outside world. Though Vanessa presented herself as kind, giving, and loving, her treatment of the housekeeper revealed her self-centeredness, dishonesty, and disrespect. By contrast, Margaret, Ethan's mother, exhibited courage, patience, wisdom, and unquestionable love. She was ready to give up her comfort and even jeopardize her relationship with her son to shield him from a life based on lies. Furthermore, the story shows us that integrity and honesty are more valuable than riches or beauty. Though they could for a short time, lies and deception finally show themselves and always have terrible consequences. Moreover, the tale reminds us to respect our parents and pay attention to their advice, since their experience and love usually enable them to spot hazards we might miss. We should never evaluate someone based on their job or appearance, since everyone deserves respect and compassion. Real love is founded on respect, honesty, and trust, not on money or social level.